Hello and welcome. Today is the 7th of March, and you are currently listening to the Critical Conversation podcast, where we are examining political and cultural issues critically. I'm joined here again by my co-hosts Ted and Liam. Hey guys.
Hello.
Hey.
So, there's a lot happening in the news. We want to cover two main things today, both everything happening with the Democrats in that race right now, and then we're going to hand it over to Ted to give us a rundown of the spreading coronavirus as that is becoming an epidemic quickly. So I just wanted to start really with the Democrats and all the races involved with that going on in the polls. So last week, of course, there was Super Tuesday. They had the South Carolina election, which surprisingly, these victories went to Joe Biden, which really came as a surprise to most. It also came with a lot of casualties. Just in this past week, the race dropped Buttigieg, Tom Steyer, Amy Klobuchar, and more recently Elizabeth Warren.
And Bloomberg also dropped out as well.
Michael Bloomberg ended his $500 million campaign. Now, the thing is, after these people dropped out, most of them after the South Carolina primary, they all backed Joe Biden, so a lot of people attribute that to his sweeping win in Super Tuesday, where he really he decimated Bernie Sanders with more than double his number of won states, especially in the Southern Belt. He really just swept through. He took all that. Bernie, he won his hometown. He won some other decently sized states, but I think at this point it's safe to project that Joe Biden will be the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, before the South Carolina caucus, at that point, Bernie was predicted having a 1 in 2 chance of victory. Afterwards, that dropped, and then you saw what happened on Super Tuesday as Sanders was wiped off the board. He's at such a disadvantage now. It's more unlikely that he will than it was that Biden would return. So there's still a chance, because again, Biden had a very small chance of making a comeback, and he still did. It's not impossible, but at this point, it seems incredibly unlikely that Bernie very unlikely that he'll become the nominee.
Yeah. Honestly, if I were a Democrat right now, I would feel scared down to my core, because if they're really running their hopes on Joe Biden, this is the man that in a matter of days thought he was running for Senate. He mistook which state he was in. He also thought that Super Tuesday was on Thursday, to name a fraction of his gaffes. And it's not just slip-ups, which every politician makes. These are just very interesting.
These are serious errors. They are, every person that talks makes mistakes at some point in their life.
But this is different.
But most
these aren't just
people,
mistakes.
Like in 2012, proclaiming that the next president would be Barack America. It's just a very interesting chain of events. He's also being more seriously investigated for everything that went down tied to the
Ukraine,
impeachment. Yes.
Well, tied to Ukraine and his son, Hunter Biden.
Yes, because his son, who didn't have a job, just walked into Ukraine. His dad, as the vice president, pulls a few strings, and he walks out with several $100 million, several $100,000 a month. It
was a very tricky situation. And then Trump, I think, did the right thing, which was to ask for some kind of investigation.
Not to harken back to an old impeachment, but I believe Trump's eye was not on finding dirt on a candidate he's running against. I think it was looking into what looks like criminal activity from all aspects. So that's what the Democrats are running on. That's interesting. As he seems to, and that part of the irony is that Joe Biden's main, like his slogan, or what you'll hear him talk about the most, is bringing back dignity to the White House.
His main selling point.
And I feel like that's exactly what he would be taking away if he went back. Because honestly, there isn't a lot of dignity has been taken out of politics. A lot of it has been taken back to identity politics, which we believe is one of the most atrocious things in modern history, is the fact that you would elect someone based off of what they look like.
Yeah, that's although there is something to be said about there's since the age of video has come about, appearance has played a much bigger role in elections. Um, but when it comes down to your race or gender, when it came to Hillary Clinton, a large portion of what she was running on, or many of the people who supported her, only wanted to support her because she was a woman, which is not. It's really not what should be happening.
The greatest appeal that we would make here on the podcast is to vote for someone, even if you disagree with us. Vote in general, but vote on someone not based off of whether they're male or female or their race. You vote for them based off of their ideals, and how they project to run a country.
Or in the case of many Democrats this upcoming election, they're voting who they think can defeat Donald Trump, which is
it's almost a form of identity politics, because it seems that like that's all they're running for,
that's all they care about at this point.
Exactly. So half of their running, it's like half of them wouldn't have a clue of what to do if they actually beat him, because their policies are so just dull and blunt.
With Warren running for months before she actually explained how her healthcare plan would work. And the second she explained it, her poll rating plummeted. It was entertaining to watch.
Even Bernie, he can't give a straight answer about his Medicare plan. They ask him, how do you plan to pay for this? And he says, we don't know yet. We don't have all the answers yet. And you don't just jump into a $40 trillion debt plan and figure out how to pay for it when you're in the middle of it.
That's a really bad idea. But I mean, I think at this point, originally, I think that the main reason that Biden is winning is because he is seen as a person who has a chance at beating Trump. I don't think Bernie could have beat Trump in any situation.
Well, the interesting thing about Bernie is I believe he has a lot of popular support, certainly more than Joe Biden, but that's the issue.
I think he does in California, but I think once you leave most places, Biden does have the support, which is shown by him absolutely sweeping up.
Yeah, but the thing was, Biden's sweep was not based off of just citizens, it was based off of delegates.
That is true.
That's the Electoral College delegates is what determines an election, so you can have all the popular vote you want, but it won't win election, because Hillary, although I believe unfairly, won the popular vote in 2016. She lost the Electoral College, and that's really what makes a difference.
That is absolutely true, but I still don't think that Bernie would have been able to muster the I don't think he could have been able to get either the Electoral College or the popular vote. I think that there are most of the never Trumpers are even more of a never Sanders than they are, because he is in fact a communist. He may claim to be a democratic socialist, but if you look at his policies, he honeymooned in the Soviet Union for one.
I believe anybody that praises Fidel Castro should be watched.
I shouldn't say he is for a fact a communist. He's very likely a communist. Most of his policies are very socialist.
I believe
communistic.
What this race showed us on Tuesday, or as Biden would say Thursday, it really showed us that America isn't ready for a democratic socialist or a communist or whatever he is. He's just too radical to be elected.
I think so too. I think that's why he lost.
I think it'll be a good 50 years before.
Well, and the thing is, it's not that we're not ready. We just don't want one.
Exactly.
In the 20th century, we spent decades fighting communism. In the Korean War, the Vietnam War, we spent millions of lives and decades fighting against communism. We're not going to accept it all of a sudden.
It's to trample on the names of those who died to keep it out of our country.
It's so entrenched in our culture to be against that. We're a very capitalist nation. We're the most capitalist nation in the world at this point.
And even the founders had to reject the basic tendencies of it. When they were first setting the ground laws for America, they were debating whether or not each man should have just a certain portion of land and a certain amount of food every day. And then they saw that it wasn't a working system of government, because there are men who are not working but still getting their fair share. So while socialism claims to really take care of the undermined, too hardworking people. It really takes away from people who work hard and just gives to the lazy.
It certainly does. And in the end, it does end up taking away from those who are actually impoverished. If you look at nations in South America and in China, there are many places where there are seriously large amounts of people suffering. Like they're suffering horribly. And right now in China, the suffering situation is getting a lot worse with the recent spread of the
Coronavirus.
Yeah.
Right, and
Well,
I'd like to hand
COVID-19,
that over. I'd like to hand that over next to Ted just to really give us a rundown. So what are I know I saw a graph just showing the start of the coronavirus, and then it's just on an upward spike. Can you just tell us a little bit about all that?
Yes, at the moment there are 105,977 people in the world infected, and there are 3,569 people who have died.
Well, there's not 105,000 infected right now, though, right?
There have been infected cases, that's true. There are 43,000 currently infected. However, the situation is, with those who have previously been infected, it's difficult to tell how long the virus sticks around, because those who are no longer infected are deemed so after they have no longer had a fever for 10 days, and have swabbed negative for the virus at least once. And so it's possible that there still could be some in them, and it's very, very difficult to track because it has currently a 2 to 14 day range for incubation period. And what incubation period means is the amount of time it takes from when you were first infected to you start seeing symptoms. And during that period, you can infect other people. And so because of that, and because of the rate at which this virus has expanded, going from starting in about February and about 10,000 people infected to today being over 100,000 people, you can see that it spreads rapidly. And it's very difficult to keep track of, starting on February 1st, there were 304 people dead, and now again today, 3,000 people dead. Mm-hmm. It spreads rapidly. Currently, the death rate is about, or mortality rate is currently about 3.4%, which is in fact worse than the flu. Let me find the exact flu mortality rate right now.
So this is really, in a lot of ways, it's going to be an epidemic. I know the Trump campaign, or the Oval Office has released a task force for it. Vice President Mike Pence was assigned. He's working 20-hour shifts a day. They're tackling this, and hitting it where it needs to be hit.
Yeah. And I did locate the statistic when it comes to influenza, which is what a lot of people compare it to. Now, influenza has 2 deaths per every 100,000 people on average. Now, we'll turn back to COVID-19, which has 3,500 people dead for 100,000 people infected. Mm-hmm. So you can see that is exponentially higher than the death mortality rate for influenza, which is what it's most commonly compared to.
So we would just urge not to really pass this over as just the flu.
No, and it's also not seasonal in the same way that the flu is. It's
not corona season, it's just...
Well, because the reason why I say that is because it has reached nations such as Iran and Middle Eastern nations where the average temperature is much higher than it is even in our summers right now. So even in these hot climate nations, it's still surviving. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, direct UV light can kill it. So sunlight can kill the virus. Also, washing your hands and using hand sanitizer can help to slow the spread of the disease. However, it can infect through any mucous membrane, so that means it can infect through your mouth, through your nose, or through your eyes. So that rendering surgical masks, like many in China are wearing, they'd have a small effect, but because it can still infect through the eyes, it means that doesn't stop it.
So if you have glasses, you're pretty much fine.
Not exactly. Not unless you're wearing swimming goggles or something
Or something that can really
something
block
along
it.
that.
Walk around with swimming goggles then.
So next, I would just really like to we'll finish the segment on this virus by asking, what measure of preparedness do we need to take? Just precautions.
Now, from looking at what is happening in Italy at the moment, where the virus is spreading rapidly, and there, I believe, over 50,000 people have been quarantined so far in Italy, which is a staggering number. From what we can see there, food is being taken off the shelves and rapidly. Anytime there's any sort of food or anything, it's bought up right away. So I'd recommend now, if you don't have that problem, start buying up extra food, stuff, non-perishables. It doesn't have to be a lot, just enough that if you go to the grocery store one day and there's not as much food there because people bought it all, it would just be a smart idea. In general, also purchasing extra water if you don't have a pump. I don't believe that we'll be losing power a lot, especially in the US. I don't believe it's going to reach that level. But there still could be a lot of deaths in the US and a very high... primarily, I would say, though, is try to refrain from traveling if you can. Don't travel to cities. Don't travel to foreign nations. Stay where you are. If you can avoid going out as much as possible, do that. Just because the reason why China has been able to, in fact, slow the spread of the virus within its borders is because it's locked down all of their cities and all their towns.
And part of the spreading issue is that the incubation period is anywhere from like 14 days to 27 days. So really, you can just be putting it around wherever and not know it.
Yes, exactly. It's communally spread virus. So being in large groups of people, you cough once, you can infect multiple people from that one cough.
Right.
Scary.
Indeed it is. And that's why, while I'm not saying that this is going to be the apocalypse, this is not going to wipe out all of humanity, a lot of people could end up becoming very, very sick and or dying, and it's still something we should take very seriously. Again, I would advise against traveling, and I would advise that you make sure you're prepared in case you go to the store one day and there's nothing there. You have enough food at home that you don't have to worry. Those are just basic measures that one can take in any situation that I would recommend across the board, especially like living in, coastal areas. There are times when hurricanes happen and you can't go to the store. And so really just having a small stock of food and water in the event that you're out of power for a couple days, or there's a bad storm or a blizzard or some event that's out of your control, you're at least prepared.
All right, yeah. So that's some good discussion on the coronavirus. I think those have been some really good segments. I appreciate all your thoughts on that, and just be sure to heed that advice, and any other precautions that you think are necessary. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening. You can subscribe to us here on YouTube. We love to hear any thoughts and feedback, as always, in the comments section. And if you are interested in a guest feature like we have had, you can reach out to us for that at thecriticalconversationpodcast@gmail.com. So we've looked at these things. Looks like we're probably going to have Joe Biden as our contender to President Trump.
Which should be an interesting show to watch.
It'll be very interesting. And so we all know there's that very famous quote from the U.S. that says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." But I would just like to paraphrase in the words of Joe Biden. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created by the thing." Thank you, and have a wonderful week.